warm welcome to our listening audience. My name is John Carroll. I'm the CEO of the Service Council. Welcome to the In-Service Podcast series, where we feature some of the industry's leading minds around service and field service, customer experience, and supply chain-oriented topics. This is a live streaming event. We'll be capturing this in a recorded fashion, and it will be downloadable and accessible via whatever channel you get your podcast from. So if that's YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Overcast, or some other channel, it will be found there. It will also be found at our website. You can go to www.servicecouncil.com. You can also go to the Service Council if that's your choice, our previous URL and brand. But it is available and accessible as a consumable asset on our website. You can listen back to it, share it with colleagues, so on and so forth. And I'd like to invite our listening audience to jump in today. We have a featured guest who I'm going to introduce here in just a short minute. That is an expert around topics related to supply chain. And I'll tell you, he gave a keynote speech at last year's Smarter Services Symposium in Chicago. Shameless plug. Early bird registration is open for the 2022 event, September 19th through the 21st. Hope you can join us. But we not only heard questions from our listening audience in person at the conference, we heard people just raising their hands simply to thank Alex for the discussion, but also talking about the partnership that supply chain has with service and the importance of it. And it was just a really warm welcome that Alex had, and his content was fantastic. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest. His name is Alex Ward. He is the Executive Director of Supply Chain of Cummins. Cummins is a large multinational enterprise, $24 billion in revenue, annual revenues last year. And they're a leading manufacturer of power generator engine components, and they have greater than 58,000 employees across the globe. They've been featured for 14 consecutive years on Ethisphere's World's Most Ethical Companies list, which is a testament to their business practices and cultural beliefs around building a sustainable supply chain and in their practices, if you will. So I am so incredibly pleased to welcome Alex Ward to the discussion. Alex, welcome.
Thanks so much, John, for the warm introduction. We'll see if I can live up to some of the words you used to praise there, leading minds and expert. I hope I can live up to that. But it was certainly a great opportunity to be involved in the Service Council, and appreciated the opportunity to speak with the group last summer. It was a great discussion, great engagement from the team. Really looking forward to the symposium in September too.
Thanks so much, Alex. So Alex, I introduced you briefly. Tell us a little bit about yourself, personal, education, career. What led you to the role of the Executive Director of Supply Chain of Cummins?
Yeah, happy to, John. So I have responsibility for what we call supply chain strategy and transformation. I've been with Cummins just over 4 years, and in that role, I'm responsible for 4 or 5 key areas. We talk about our long-term corporate supply chain strategy, how we create value across our different businesses, across all of our segments, across Cummins. We also do and support a center of excellence for supply chain design. It's where we make a lot of the sort of the modeling and analytics for where we place our manufacturing sites, how we design our warehousing networks, how we optimize the flow of inventory. We have a team we call Supply Chain Transformation. This is a global but regionally organized continuous improvement team where we try to build foundational capabilities and support some of our larger transformation programs. And then we have a supply chain solutions team that partners with our IT colleagues to deliver design, deploy the roadmaps, the infant care, the user acceptance testing, all that fun stuff for key enabling supply chain solutions. And together, we really are just trying to build capability for our integrated supply chains, improve outcomes for our customers, and create value for the business. I got exposed to Cummins in my past life. I was a consultant with Ernst & Young before I joined Cummins. Cummins was a client of mine, dating back more than a decade. Always one of my favorite clients, one of the most complex and interesting supply chains. Of course, global company operating in 190 countries around the world. And I thought they just had all kinds of opportunities and challenges and problems and interesting things that I could get exposed to. So when I had the opportunity to join Cummins just over 4 years ago, I jumped at the opportunity. I also grew up in the Midwest. I was born in Ohio, raised in Michigan. I live in Illinois. I work now in Indiana, where Cummins is headquartered quite a bit, and just really enjoyed the culture of a global company that also felt really familiar. Before joining Cummins, like I mentioned, I was in consulting. I worked in Ernst & Young's supply chain transformation practice for over 7 years, and Capgemini Consulting before that, where I sort of first got exposed to different industries and different client challenges, and got pretty passionate about supply chain improvement. And getting into supply chain was kind of a chance encounter. I went to Michigan State University. It's one of the best supply chain programs in the country, but I didn't know that at the time. I was a naive, ignorant, maybe still am, kid trying to decide what I wanted to do, and spent a couple years taking lots of different courses and didn't even know what supply chain management was. I was interested in business and engineering, and I didn't know what my path would be. And it just so happened I sort of met an older brother of a good friend who was talking about supply chain management. And I asked him, what's that? And a couple of conversations later, I was applying to the business school at Michigan State and found my way into the supply chain management program. A lot of ways, the rest is history. I've continued my education also with a focus in supply chain. I did my MBA at the University of Tennessee, and with a focus in global supply chain, and they've got an excellent program down there. And now I'm doing this strategy and transformation stuff.
Awesome. So you made a couple comments in there: complexity and it's a glutton for punishment, right? You like that complexity. You just wanted to continue in that supply chain realm. So good on you. And we're going to dig into that complexity a little bit further. Some of the things that you talked about, competing in 190 countries and integrating all of these logistics and supply chain functions together. There's some coolness and some challenges there to orchestrate things, especially as supply and demand sort of goes up and down with all the craziness we've gone through. We'll dig into that in just a little bit. First of all, our listening audience is kind of a range of both executive leadership, middle level leadership, and perhaps those emerging professionals that are joining the ranks of the professional world. Let's double down on that career path, right? Getting into supply chain. Your viewpoints on the career path in terms of it being an exciting career opportunity, and is there a career ladder? Is there a career path for those that are considering getting into the supply chain role and into the supply chain world? What are your viewpoints on that, and what would you suggest to any new recent graduate who wants to consider a career in your footsteps there?
Yeah, great question, John. There's all kinds of ways to get into supply chain. So if you think about, just sort of supply chain 101, the scope of supply chain, what is that even, right? So we talk a lot about everything from the procurement of raw materials through the movement and distribution and warehousing of materials, the purchasing, sourcing, category management processes, all the way then to the distribution to end customers. And there's all kinds of functional skill sets, whether it's manufacturing, industrial engineering, whether it's thinking about operations improvement and optimization, planning processes, demand, supply, production planning, all those kinds of things, trade management. There are so many facets to the integrated global supply chain. And as a result, lots of exciting career opportunities for people of all kinds of backgrounds to get engaged in the supply chain one way or other. And of course, the supply chain management is also very different for different industries. So industrial manufacturing, automotive kind of has maybe a more traditional discrete manufacturing way to think about the supply chain, but then you get into retail or consumer packaged goods and chemicals or any other conversion industry that has a different set of supply chain challenges. And then there's also some pretty exciting opportunities in even roles like purchasing and sourcing for companies that maybe aren't manufacturing companies. They might be insurance companies or life sciences companies or media and entertainment companies. So there's all kinds of supply chain like opportunities in a broad spectrum of industries. And there's all kinds of avenues to get into it. So, for me, I maybe took a more direct path. I studied supply chain management, and I wanted to get into the type of roles I'm in now. But there are certainly lots of folks that we see in the supply chain at Cummins that came from more diverse backgrounds, whether they were mechanical engineers, they might have been attorneys and dealt with commercial law and contract law, and as a result, they got into the sourcing side of supply chain. Or they might have been marketing and sales folks that were doing a lot of account management, and as a result, were interacting with the purchasing and supply chain groups of their customers, and so they wanted to get in the supply chain. So there's all kinds of avenues in. There's lots of great programs now at top universities for supply chain management that will give you this breadth of understanding in your university courses, and it will really equip you to hit the ground running in any number of roles that may be part of a supply chain organization for one of these larger companies. And then I would also encourage people to think about just the path that you might have out of supply chain, right? You don't need to just do supply chain work. There's all kinds of opportunities to get into things like general management or more senior business leadership opportunities with a good foundation in supply chain. And supply chain really equips you to have a lot of that good business understanding. It's a huge part of the P&L for many companies. And as a result, gives you a lot of that financial acumen that you would need to be a business leader and a business manager as well.
Yeah, and all those career pathways in that you highlight, those are also potential career pathways out in terms of career lattice instead of just ladder, right? So thinking about adjacencies and how does being in supply chain, the role, teach you and prepare you better to think about broadening the scope of your career adjacent to supply chain. So I appreciate those viewpoints. So we've navigated an extremely turbulent time frame, right? COVID, the pandemic, the last year plus has been pretty wild, and behind all of the pandemic related challenges, now we have international conflicts happening and all sorts of different things that are impacting the world. And we've heard this phrase disruption, right? And I've heard things like logistics disruption. I've heard production delays, over reliance on third-party partners,
Mm-hmm.
The tech stack, and thinking about all the integrated technologies and the importance of investing in certain technologies to improve upon one part of that supply chain, that integrated supply chain. The whole workforce and labor side of things, right? Shortages and all the good things in between. So disruption is kind of like broad, right? Tell us a little bit about how disruption has impacted Cummins and some of the things you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, we can do a whole podcast just on disruption.
Sure can.
I think, John. It's systemic, it's significant, and it seems like a new one pops up every day, right? So certainly in the last couple of years with the COVID-19 pandemic, we have had to respond to all kinds of challenges in the global supply chain, and also in the case of our industry at a time of increasing demand. And with a global supply chain, we have sources and manufacturing all over the world. So it creates an added level of complexity anytime you have sort of a chink in your armor or a node in your network that is creating a particular challenge. In the case of the COVID-19 pandemic, a big part of our priority right away, of course, was just the safety of our employees. How do we make sure that we not only respond to the operational or sort of the supply chain content disruptions, but also how do we make sure we respond to the people disruption and thinking about the safety of our people, getting all the right protocols in place? How do we disseminate all these procedures across all of our operations and ensure that we're creating the right environment for our teams? And then, of course, on top of that, you've got all kinds of constraints in the supply chain. So initially, we saw a lot of the shutdowns and lockdowns and challenges in China as the outbreak, of course, started in Wuhan. And we've got significant operations in Wuhan, in China, and that created a lot of challenges for us in our domestic China business, but also where we had suppliers that were exporting for manufacture in other regions. So a lot of the turbulence we went through was just getting our arms around where is the next challenge going to be and how do we prioritize them. So visibility, right? We talk about disruption. One of the key sort of capabilities, enablers to allow a company like Cummins to respond to that disruption is visibility. How do we get better supply chain visibility? And we've got a number of initiatives focused on precisely that. And then you get into some of the, operations challenges continue, and we start asking questions about, well, man, this is here to stay. How do we build more resilience into our supply chain networks? So we've long been on a path to think about our sourcing strategies and how do we make sure we have multiple sources available You'll hear terms like dual or multi-sourcing so that you're not over-reliant on a single-sourced supplier. And we've started looking more aggressively at, like, well, how do we do that actually and make sure we have dual and multi-sources in different regions? So if particular geography has some sort of challenge, like in the case of the COVID-19 pandemic, that we can mitigate from a geography perspective as well. And then you think even longer term, there's a lot of change in our industry. So moving beyond just the COVID-19 pandemic, but thinking about the path to zero. And Cummins recently launched our strategy. We call it Destination Zero, and how we really power a more prosperous world, but also be really thoughtful of our impact on climate change. This is certainly one of the key challenges, if not the key challenge of our time. And we need to make sure we're supportive as the industry changes and moves away from combustion engines, perhaps, or fossil fuels, that we're accelerating the path to that zero emissions future. And for us, that creates a lot of challenges in our supply chain. It makes us think about our supply base, and do we have a long-term viable supply base, and when will those challenges arise, and how will we mitigate them, as well as just how we plan our own investments internally, so that we are supporting and continuing to support a base business, which we think is viable and continue to grow and will continue to be profitable for many, many, many years, while we're investing in our new power business and thinking about alternative fuels and hydrogen powered vehicles and battery electric and the supply chains to support them, as well as the service and support to support them. And that's, of course, a big part of your audience, is how we think about how we offer that sales, service, and support. And we do that through our distribution business, and they're a close partner with us in this whole journey. So we spend, as you can imagine, the strategy and transformation team, we're constantly thinking about disruption, supply chain risk. What are the capabilities we need to prioritize to mitigate them?
So the disruption threat is going to continue this year, of course, right? So it's predicted that supply chain issues facing the U.S. will continue pretty significantly. Major ports across the globe have already started working 24/7, and it's causing labor shortage and workforce burnout. And what are some of the additional things that are sort of headlights at the end of the tunnel, whether it's the end of the tunnel or the freight train coming at us? What are some of the other disruptions that you're sort of tracking as you lead your organization?
Well, certainly one of the hot ones right now is geopolitical risk, and unfortunately the war in the Ukraine does create challenges for global supply chains, and that's one we've been monitoring closely. There's been a number of rules released on new export controls, of course, and coordinating across all the regimes that apply those rules to make sure we're being compliant and being good corporate citizens. We also have employees that are impacted in Russia that we want to make sure we're caring for and being considerate of as we're navigating this really turbulent time. And things like that have these trickle-down effects, right? They have impacts to trade routes that would cross, railways or airspace in those regions. There's certain tiers of commodities and metals that come out of Russia, of course. We're seeing a lot of inflation. So those are big headwinds for us as well. Metal markets have been pretty active over the last couple of years, and we continue to see challenges and things that we need to mitigate in that space. So this is a big one for us. And I think how we manage inflation will continue to be a priority. And again, a lot of these same levers, right? What do we have good visibility to it? Do we have the right supplier relationships in place? Are we mitigating the risk to best of our ability and sort of managing our costs and our overall shareholder return is a constant battle and a big area of focus for the company right now.
And we're going to circle back to the sustainable comments that you've made in the whole net zero and all the good things there. I'd love to dig in a little bit on that. And I want to encourage our listening audience, if you have a question or a comment, or if you'd like to come behind some of the comments that Alex is making, or if you'd like to submit a question to him to see if you can solicit some feedback and input on your own supply chain practices, by all means, please do use the comment function, and we'll see if we can fit that into our discussion here. So a lot of buzzwords all over the place in the world, especially in the business world, and we've been hearing agile and resilient and all the good things associated with that. What does that mean to Cummins? You've talked a little bit about it throughout our discussion already, but tell us a little bit about some of the practices and the cultural initiatives that you have in terms of agility and resiliency and all the good things.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. I don't know that it's got a very clear answer, right? A lot of those terms, agile, flexibility, I think they're meaningful, they're purposeful, they fit the time for sure, but they also kind of all overlap a little bit, right? Depending on who you ask. And for us, we want to be agile to serve our customers, right? At the end of the day, we want to make sure we can get them, a quality product from a supply chain perspective, a quality product at the right place at the right time at the right cost. And our ability to be agile and respond to both changes in customer demand or preference, as well as sort of impacts of our supply chain, means a lot, right? Again, I talked about visibility. It means we got to be able to sense and respond to these events that will potentially impact our supply chains or our customers very rapidly. It means that we need to be able to have maybe different fulfillment lanes or different manufacturing capacity if we have a challenge in any particular area. And then on the supply base side, we have to have a flexible set of suppliers that we can manage and be nimble with to meet these needs and challenges as they arise. So when I think of agility, it's as much about things like the right system capabilities to provide that sense and respondability as it is management to direct the right activities, as it is the physical supply chain to be able to then actually execute on them. So for us, we've spent more and more time thinking about, as I mentioned, having the right sort of multi-sources or dual sources so that we're not too exposed to any particular supplier or disruption. We're also doing a fair amount of work in our North American network to think about how we can be more integrated across the tiers in our supply chain. So how our master distribution centers work with our regional distribution centers out to our branches and our dealers and our customers. And we want to create more integrated visibility across that network. We also want to have the ability to more flexibly ship and fulfill where we're short. And so those are things we're always looking to optimize, right? Where do we have material? Where can we best deploy it? How do we sort of return it to our network so that we can push it back out to customers? How do we make sure we have the right stocking strategies? Things like multi-echelon inventory optimization for the supply chain nerds out there, right? That's been a big area for us for the last couple of years, and we're pretty confident we've created better service than we would have had without some of those capabilities. And unfortunately, though, our biggest challenge right now, again, being so constrained in the global supply chain, we still have lots of part shortages, and that's been a challenge that we are constantly working with our customers to make sure, again, we're getting the visibility to the customers. We're thinking about how we allocate appropriately for those parts that are on allocation, how we drive the right action back into our supply base to break some of those constraints. And our ability to do that in a rapid way, align all the right resources, respond to the biggest priority issues is probably how we think about us being agile. And when we're not agile, right, we struggle to maybe find what the biggest issue is or prioritize the right work, and then we're not being as responsive. When we think of resiliency, I think a lot of what we think about is sort of that redundant capacity, again, in the supply base and our manufacturing capacity, our ability to ship and fulfill from multiple locations, have the right inventory hedges in place so that we've got parts available even when we have operational challenges, whether it's pandemic or a labor shortage or a weather event. Those are all things we want to make sure we've got resiliency in place to respond to those customer needs.
Just a quick supplemental question. Parts disposition, right? The importance of knowing where parts are, where components are in the supply chain, whether it's forward logistics and availability for your service agents that are in the field or your service channels that are supporting your customers. But then also on the flip side, components coming back to the enterprise in terms of the reverse logistics cycle and circular economies that come about from refurbished and redistribution policies and things like that. that's a huge topic
Mhm.
of discussion amongst service executives, and that relationship between you and the service executive is super important in terms of maintaining that customer experience and maintaining that visibility, as you talked about earlier, to where parts are and do we have enough parts to enable our teams to be effective and all the good things. Talk a little bit about that partnership from your standpoint, the service and supply chain partnership. What level of importance do you place on that?
So that partnership's been one of our most significant transformation initiatives in the last few years, and even I guess really even before that. So if I use North America as an example, Cummins long had many independent distributors in North America, and over the last several years, ending really I think in about 2016, we fully acquired back our North American distribution network. And a big part of the business justification and strategy for doing that was to make sure we had much more integration to our customer facing part of our business, and that's just been a critical strategy for the company for several years now. And the supply chain integration there is one of the biggest enablers of that synergy. So if you think about how we get visibility, part of that now is we're all part of one company, and we have the opportunity to drive more integrated systems and processes so that we're actually seeing where parts are deployed and if they're turning and serving the demand of our customers. So we've actually driven, John, probably the better part of 3 years now, a very focused effort on what we call our DBU, our distribution business unit, and our aftermarket supply chain, much more integration, so that we're doing precisely that. And we're really thinking about it as one integrated value chain, not just a group that we hand off to and expect our parts and sales and service managers to just manage themselves. So by looking at it as an integrated supply chain, and we're well into this journey, but we still have a lot more room to improve. We are confident we'll be able to create a lot more value, and understanding the service needs of our customers, right? What they expect to have on the shelf and when, proactive planning of major service events or overhauls, working closely on our rebuild cycles and partnership with fleets. Those are all key activities that on the sort of the customer facing side send signals now back into our supply chain where we can do a better job of proactively placing inventory and making sure that we have the right parts on hand to support those needs. Again, this is the optimization that will never end, right? We'll always be looking to find ways to do this better, and we have a lot of opportunities to improve in this space. But I think we've made really good inroads. At the end of the day, our service professionals are out there in the field working hard every day to serve the customer, and they expect when they have an engine down or routine maintenance that they're going to have the parts they need to get their vehicles back on the road and get the uptime that they expect. And so the number one part of having that is the service technician trained and qualified and available, and the number two part is they got to have parts to put on these vehicles, and that's the job of the integrated supply chain.
Yeah, and a tightly woven, integrated supply and service chain together couldn't be more important because it's not just CSAT. It's revenue, it's cost recovery, right, on the returning of parts and the reverse logistics process. There's entitlements oftentimes in terms of cost recovery and cost drains on the organization that you can always plug into on serialized components. And when you're talking about sophisticated assets like what Cummins produces, that's of course an important function, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that the whole sort of return and service supply chain is critical for us for a number of reasons. That one of it, which is we have a pretty significant remanufacturing business, and so we need sort of the core, right, our used parts and components to come back so that we can requalify them and support the raw materials effectively now for our remanufacturing business. So getting visibility into what parts we expect to come back, how we manage our now sort of returned core parts for our remanufacturing business is a key part of our inventory management work. And then we also get a lot of insights on warranty and repair, right? So we can improve our products, make sure the quality in the field is better, get the right signals to proactively address issues before they become significant campaigns. Those are all things that we want to avoid. And the better signals we have back from our distribution and our service business, the more effectively we can mitigate those risks and provide a better quality product to the customer.
And parts is oftentimes pointed to as one of the most profitable components to the revenue equation on the service side, right? So that's another huge lever there. Let's circle back. We talked about sustainability. Cummins is a 14-time recipient of Ethisphere's World's Most Ethical Companies. Ethical and sustainable are oftentimes synonymous, right? And the United Nations published 17 sustainable goals by the year 2030, and those goals are not just carbon emission efficient practices, but also, underprivileged and all the things that they're looking at in terms of diversity and so there's a broader sustainable story there. But talk about Cummins' viewpoints on sustainability and how woven this is into your day-to-day practices.
Yeah, I love the question, John. I mean, this is foundational to our corporate strategy. So we've had our Planet 2050 strategy in place for a long time. We think about how we leverage the unique capabilities of Cummins to better serve the objectives of our planet and to manage this systemic crisis of our time, climate change. And Cummins, of course, just as many other manufacturers, has long been focused on sustainable operations, right? We think about how do we use less energy in our facilities? How do we make sure that we're supporting water goals, for instance, in different regions in which we operate, so that we're not consuming too many water resources, and that we're reclaiming, recycling, reusing water. We talk a lot about packaging waste, right? All those kinds of things have long been priorities for the organization, as it is for many. Cummins, however, is uniquely positioned. We make a lot of combustion engines, right? And they use fossil fuels. So our ability to invest in new technology as this broad market transforms to the path to zero emissions over the next several decades, we're uniquely positioned to be a part of that. And we recognize that really the carbon footprint of our products is our single biggest challenge in meeting our 2050 objectives, but it's also our single biggest opportunity. And we're really excited about paving the way for new power solutions, battery, hybrid, and hydrogen powered, as well as green hydrogen infrastructure through our electrolyzer business, so that we're actually creating really green energy for these power solutions to then use. And that's going to be the crux of the transformation. If we're going to get to a future that's really a zero emissions future, right, we're going to need these types of solutions. And we're uniquely positioned to provide those. And it's also something we get pretty excited about, because now our Planet 2050 vision really comes together. It's not just about the more traditional reducing waste or thinking about how we work with our supply chain to reduce waste and have more efficiencies, but also our product and our overall product roadmap over the next several decades as our customers move to this path to zero. And for us, destination zero strategy is something we get pretty excited about.
Yeah, huge kudos to you and Cummins on those efforts. You're right. It's everybody's problem and opportunity. I would agree with that. Let's go to recent research conducted by the Service Council. We just conducted a research effort on KPIs and metrics, and granted, the survey was conducted amongst service executives, those that operate and manage services P&L. So global responsibility, mostly large enterprise, very complex supply chains. About 75% of our audience are similar companies, dissimilar in terms of asset, but similar in terms of practices and supply chain structure and customer footprint and that global nature. And supply chain was ranked 5th out of 5 metrics categories amongst service leaders. It's not surprising, right? The service leader has an agenda. They've got cost and they've got revenue and CSAT and employee metrics to consider, and they oftentimes lean on their supply chain partners to handle many of these things, right? But recently, we conducted a service leaders agenda, and supply chain became the largest external challenge amongst service leaders, right? So it's kind of a disconnect there. And so I'm curious your viewpoint of the role that service leaders can help in terms of steering your direction and agenda, and how do those things come together You talked about the importance of the partnership between service and supply chain, but talk a little bit about your peer on the service side of the business. Should supply chain be up the ladder in terms of prioritization?
Well, I'm certainly biased, John. I'd like to say it should be. I mean, one way to think about it is maybe just how a lot of these service organizations have been structured over the years. They've had, a focus on technical service, and as a result, we don't expect everybody in the service organization to be supply chain professionals. And at the same time, it's hard to teach all your supply chain professionals how to be technical service providers and service leaders and managers. And so there is, I think, just through the nature of industry and education and the way we've scoped roles and so forth, there's two distinct groups in a lot of organizations, and their partnership is critical. What I guess I would say is that you need good understanding in the service organization of the supply chain, but the supply chain's got to also start thinking about the service organization as their customer and the customer signal that they're going to get. And I think in many cases, we buffer the unknowns or the variability in that customer signal with inventory and waste and lost productivity. And if you're a purist and you want to really optimize to best serve our service channels, we need more collaboration. We need more insight into the customer behavior, and we need to make sure that then drives the supply chain to respond to those different customer service segments. One of the biggest things supply chain folks talk about all the time is customer segmentation, and what is the supply chain treatment then that you need to have in place to serve these different customer needs. And we rely, in the case of industries with significant technical service businesses, we need to improve that partnership so that we really understand the customer segments. We've got the right inventory deployed to best serve their needs. We're thinking about a responsive supply base to these different needs, and we're designing our supply chains accordingly. And in many cases, I think that's still, even for companies that do this really, really well and have very high fill rates and service and so forth to customers, I think there's still a lot of optimization to be had by improving that partnership, improving that signal, if you will, the demand from our customers and from our service professionals in the field, and making sure that they're productive and efficient as well. And the supply chain has a big part in that. So yeah, I'd like to see it maybe higher on the list, but I think we all have an opportunity, through this group and others to help educate more and make sure we're driving focused action in that space.
I think we just figured out your keynote this year at the Smarter Services Symposium. How do we get service to move supply chain up their agenda? Cool. Let's circle back to that KPIs and benchmark survey, KPIs and metrics benchmark survey we recently conducted. The survey found, you talked about fill rates. The survey found low, average, and high performance in service parts fill rates, 27%, ouch, 76%, and 93% low, average, and high. How does this compare to Cummins? What are some of the metrics that you go to, and what are some of the achievements your organization has witnessed around some of the key metrics that you model your business after, and really look at the health and wellness of your own business in terms of metrics? What can you share a couple of a look under the hood, if you will, pun intended?
Yeah, it was my first question, John, was actually the sort of the time frame everybody responded to that. It's curious because the 27% is probably an honest low, I suspect, for many companies. The middle 75, kind of 74 range there for fill rates actually feels maybe too close to home. That's definitely, we've had times of performance that low. We'd much rather be in the high 90s, right? So even a 93% best in class fill rate actually feels low. But relative to recent times, probably not. There's just been so much disruption, and as a result, fill rates have tanked, and back orders have increased. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of our industry peers, as well as at Cummins. But it's certainly not where we want to be. So maybe I won't air our dirty laundry to the tune of exact metrics, but I certainly think that the last couple of years has been probably some of our most challenging times in terms of continuity and making sure we're serving our customer needs. And it's just, tiers and tiers of the supply chain that are short parts. And they're short parts because of all the disruption and sort of the cascading effect that has on the supply chain, as well as the increase in demand in our industry in particular. And we've been shipping record volumes in many cases, but still have backlogs that we need to be able to address. As far as broader metrics, I mean, we've also seen challenges in inventory, as just maybe a broader, and not just a specific Cummins example, but I think a lot of supply chain managers have seen, depending on their industry, profile changes in the inventory they need to have on hand. Consumer behaviors changed. People are working from home. We saw all the stress in the semiconductors industries, which certainly has impacted automotive. It's one of our headwinds for sure. But a lot of that's driven too by just the change in consumer demand for electronics and how the pandemic and work from home has impacted a lot of that. So you end up with this sort of, what are the metrics that you have a good baseline, because there's such a new normal for so many industries over the last couple of years. And as a result, it takes some time to reset. So you don't have the right inventory on hand, or you don't have the right supply chain design. And at the same time, you're battling all these, other headwinds. And so I think you're going to see, hopefully, a lot of predictions that we'll see shortages in certain categories go into 2023. But hopefully you'll start to see much more stability in the vast majority of key categories throughout this year. I hope it doesn't get any worse. I expect it to only get better. But with the next disruption around the corner, it's always a little bit of a guessing game. But yeah, the metrics to watch, I would certainly be, look at inventory performance, look at how companies are turning their inventory. Is a great indicator of whether or not they've got the right things on hand. Certainly where you see inventories going up, you're seeing companies that are trying to rebalance and reset. How do I make sure I've got the right mix? And companies with long product life cycles and significant aftermarket parts businesses like Cummins feel that in an exponential way, because it just takes so much more time for us to react and respond to those changes.
And there's also this notion of who owns the inventory too, right? That comes into play in terms of that inventory processing. So interesting viewpoints. And you talk about disruptions and the potential landmines that are coming. Anything that you're prognosticating in the future that you're like, whoa, this is coming at us hot and heavy. Look out.
So maybe a couple areas. So certainly inflation is one that's top of mind. We mentioned that earlier. I think we're going to need to be really clear, even just for supply chain professionals, they're going to need to be thinking about how they're forecasting cost impacts. What are the operational efficiencies or improvements that they can drive within their own business to mitigate them. They're going to be thinking about, how to manage their supply mix and balance across different sources of supply to manage those exposures. And many companies will be thinking about how that's going to drive pricing actions to their customers. And so that's going to be a key one. It takes a little while for inflationary pressures to cascade through different tiers of the supply chain. You think about raw materials all the way to end goods. And that's something that I think everybody will be laser focused on managing. I also think we'll always be on the lookout, hopefully not, but for the next Omicron or the next COVID variant that could have a detrimental effect to the global supply chain, and we certainly hope we're through the worst of that. But some recent announcements that folks have probably seen coming out of China and Shenzhen and Shanghai, where there's been lots of lockdowns with China's really just zero COVID tolerance policies. And I think it was in Shenzhen, something like 89 COVID cases led to the lockdown of over 17 million residents. And those are big manufacturing centers and drive a lot of product into global supply chains. And so we'll certainly see hot spots like that pop up and drive disruption. Some of the other challenges, I think we're going to certainly hope to see our ocean freight markets sort of come back down. It feels like they peaked last year. I mean, container loads were costing as much as $25,000 per 20-foot equivalent unit, and we're hoping to see that continue to stabilize. But again, there could be some additional headwinds there. Premium freight's always a big one that we always have our eye on, and many companies, of course, will, and trying to decide when they want to take action to expedite product and how it impacts customer service. So those are things we're going to keep a close eye on. And then longer term, I think the conversation continues, right? How are companies investing in more resilient and flexible supply chains, and where are they willing to sort of trade cost for flexibility, or they might have to nearshore products. In the case of the automotive industry, we're looking at nearshoring more products because of the requirements for regional value content in the USMCA trade agreement, the United States Mexico Canada trade agreement, which requires us to have certain amounts of content produced within the trade region. And so that's driving changes to global supply chains as well. And just, the whole protectionism, regionalization trends that will continue, I think will continue into the future. We saw, of course, all the action a couple years ago now with Brexit, USMCA, of course. We're seeing the evolution of the TPP trade agreements, and all those things will drive different regional supply chain behaviors and change for big complex global supply chains like Cummins and many other companies. So those are all on the agenda and continue to drive lots of action in our supply chains, and I suspect we'll continue to drive that for many years.
Alex, thank you so much for spending time with me today. It's a fascinating discussion and a great resource for our listening audience. I want to thank you and Cummins for sharing some of the viewpoints that you have, and we'll look forward to welcoming you at the Smarter Services Symposium to continue the dialogue, and that will be in the September timeframe for those listening. So thank you very much, Alex. I really appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely, John. Thanks so much for the opportunity. It was a pleasure speaking with you today.
Outstanding. So join us next time as we welcome Eric Anderson. Eric is the president of global services of Hologic, also a board member like Alex. Alex has made many contributions in his board capacity, this being one of them. And we'll dive into culture initiatives and building a culture of care and services humanity. Hologic is really a pioneer in the whole humanity and treating their service as a function of humanity. So really interesting discussion we'll have on our next month's edition. You can access today's podcast on our website, www.servicecouncil.com, or wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe, whether it's YouTube or Apple, Spotify, Overcast, whatever that might be. You can find us there. Until next time, please visit our website and consume some of the content we have, including today's podcast. And Alex, once again, thanks so much for your joining us and sharing some of your insights. It's been wonderful spending time with you.
Absolutely, John. Thanks again.